Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in tonight for Richard French. We focus the entire show tonight on the situation in Ferguson, Missouri. Violence there as the National Guard is being called in tonight. We go now to ABC's Marcy Gonzalez, live with the latest.
Yeah, the curfew that's been in place here the past 2 nights has been lifted, and President Obama is again calling for peace.
Let me call once again for us to seek some understanding rather than simply holler at each other. Let's seek to heal rather than to wound each other.
Today, the Missouri National Guard moving in, backing up the State Highway Patrol in securing the streets of Ferguson after another night of this. Looting, Molotov cocktails, and gunshots fired at police. Officers responding with armored trucks and tear gas.
Today, a stark contrast. There are only a few protesters out now compared to the hundreds we've seen lining this street every day since unarmed teenager Michael Brown was killed by an officer more than a week ago.
Police maintain that Officer Darren Wilson, shown in this Facebook photo, shot Brown after he was physically assaulted by the teen and his friend. Today, the county medical examiners handed their autopsy results over to the prosecutor's office, confirming the cause of death was gunshot wounds to the head and chest. Brown's family ordering their own autopsy. The preliminary results showing Brown was shot at least 6 times, including twice in the head.
There's no gunshot residues on the skin surface, so that the muzzle of the gun was at least 1 or 2 feet away, the muzzle at the time of discharge. It could have been 30 feet away.
Now, as the Justice Department conducts a 3rd autopsy, Brown's mother tells Robin Roberts all she wants is justice.
What is justice to you?
Being fair, arresting this man and making him accountable for his actions.
And a grand jury could start hearing evidence in this case on Wednesday. That's the same day that Attorney General Eric Holder is scheduled to come here to meet with federal agents who are investigating Brown's death. Live in Ferguson, Marcy Gonzalez, ABC News. Now back to you.
All right, Marcy, thank you very much. Marcy played a little bit of sound from President Obama this afternoon. More now from the president discussing it at a press conference from the White House.
In too many communities around the country, a gulf of mistrust exists between local residents and law enforcement. In too many communities, too many young men of color are left behind and seen only as objects of fear. And through initiatives like My Brother's Keeper, I'm personally committed to changing both perception and reality. And already we're making some significant progress as people of goodwill of all races are ready to chip in. But that requires that we build and not tear down. And that requires we listen and not just shout. That's how we're going to move forward together, by trying to unite each other and understand each other and not simply divide ourselves from one another.
So the president there appealing for calm. We have the National Guard being brought in to back up state police in Missouri tonight, and everybody hoping that we can at least get some more peaceful response on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri than we've had in the last couple of weeks. We also have the release tonight of that autopsy report, both the official one from the medical examiner and the unofficial one that was paid for and asked for by the Brown family. We're going to dedicate the entire program tonight to the situation in Ferguson on several different levels, ranging from everything from the police response to calls for greater responsibility within the black community. And we have a terrific panel to get into all of this tonight. We're going to start with Mayo Bartlett. He's an attorney and former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County District Attorney's Office. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Dr. W. Franklin Richardson, the senior pastor of the historic Grace Baptist Church in Mount Vernon, New York. Dr. Richardson is also the chairman of the National Action Network. Thanks for joining us. And Pastor Owen E. Williams is the pastor of the St. Mark Missionary Baptist Church in Jamaica, Queens. Thanks, all of you, for being with us tonight. I want to start with the autopsy. The family, the Wilson family, or the Brown family, says the autopsy proves that there is enough just from the autopsy itself to file charges against the officer, Darren Wilson. Mayo, you've been on both sides of these kinds of cases. From your reading of the autopsy, are they right?
An autopsy is a very important piece of information, piece of evidence, but I don't think that an autopsy in and of itself is generally enough to determine whether charges should or should not be filed. I think that at the end of the day, you have to look at the entire surrounding circumstances. You can have a suggestion that a bullet's trajectory means one thing, someone else may disagree. You may be able to say that because the bullet enters from the top and goes down, that I had to be standing and the person had to be taller than me, when that's not necessarily true. I could be kneeling down, the person could be standing over me. There are any number of different ways that the injuries could have occurred.
What was your takeaway from the information in that autopsy?
Well, my takeaway is that it's interesting to see that there are numerous shots in the arm, that there's one in the eye, one in the head. The question for me is, where were his arms? Where were Mr. Brown's arms at the time he was shot? Were his arms raised upward? Were they stretched out? And if they're stretched out, it seems a little more difficult that he would be able to get shot so many times in the arm. And also the other is the suggestion, I think from the police department itself, that some of the shots were fired while the officer was still inside the vehicle. The other thing that's interesting to me, though, is that there's no stippling on the body. The fact that there's apparently no gunshot residue, although during the second autopsy they did not have his clothing. But if there's no gunshot residue on his clothes, it means that he wasn't so close to the officer. So it makes it much less likely that this was immediate self-defense. Either Mr. Brown was retreating or he wasn't as close as the officer said he was initially.
Gentlemen, what's your view? I mean, 6 shots for holding no weapon in his hand and holding cigars in his hand.
You think, I think that's the issue. I think it's excessive when viewed by the public. I know that the professionals come in and interpret and so forth, but we have to go. We don't have the benefit of holding our responses until all of the things. People have this is built up over time. This is not. If there had been an atmosphere of trust and relationships, then that could be put in place. It's obvious that in that community, this was like the last straw, that there was tension already between the police department. And so now, in a tense situation where the police department is not trusted, the absence of African Americans throughout the police department, an untrusted police department, a young man is shot 6 times with no weapon, and the community is supposed to lay down and wait. That's unreasonable. And especially, you got to take into consideration. I mean, I think that's a good thing to suggest, but I also understand the other side. I understand the frustration of African Americans in this country as it relates to police relationships and the trusting of them.
Not just a Ferguson issue. This is not something confined.
It's bigger than that. But I think in Ferguson, we have an intense dynamic where if you look at the statistics of the community, it does not appear that the African American community has been included in the things that make a difference. Not in the political process, not in the police department, in the advantages of opportunity, economic opportunity. These things all contribute to how a public responds to an incident like this.
Is there not enough trust coming out of the official levers of government out of Ferguson for the information that we're hearing to be taken seriously? Or
yeah, Andrew, I believe so. I believe when you're seeing this explosion of violence that took place in this interaction between these 2 men, this young man, and this trained police officer, it warrants an investigation. Regardless of color, race, gender, it warrants investigation. A trained professional pulled his weapon and shot 6 times and brutally killed this young man. An investigation is warranted for that. Psychological counseling. What I would like to know is, everybody else wants to know, the reason why this happened. Now, I don't think we'll ever know that, but what we can know is the officer's perception, which will lead us to his behavior. How did he perceive this young man, and why did he respond the way he did? Trust. I don't think the community has any trust. That's right. And one of the reasons why I will say that to you is, when you have a predominantly African-American community and only 3% are represented on the police force.
5%, 3 period.
3 period. that's not that's 0.3%. That is a serious problem there. I mean, and are they living in the community, and why are they not getting jobs in that community? And how is your perception? Is it protect and serve, or is it law enforcement oriented in that community? Because those two doctrines determine the outcome of these interactions.
There are multiple reports that Michael Brown was charging at the officer. There was a radio interview with somebody who was speaking with the officer, Officer Wilson, who said that he appeared to be charging at her, and that there was some interaction within their squad car, within the Officer Wilson's squad car, leading to all of this. I'm curious, does that change anybody's perception of what we're hearing and the reaction that we've seen in Ferguson?
Doesn't change my perception, if I may. You have a trained professional, and you have a young man. Your attitude should trump your aptitude. You should be able to reason. You should be able to use your wits and your wisdom of your knowledge to diffuse the situation without using deadly force. Every argument or confrontation should not end in someone dying. It should not. And if you're going to wear the badge and say you're a trained professional, then act that way.
What we're witnessing now, Andrew, having covered a number of these for 30 years, that is going to be the alibi in court for why so many shots were fired. Normally it's, I was fearful for my life, he reached for an object, I thought he had a gun. But in this case, and see, this is why local law enforcement there had an obligation to release information as soon as possible. Because when you wait 9 days, no one in that community is going to believe anything you have to say, except for the fact that you are lining up your excuse to back this officer for him to be cleared in a court of law, or, as I contend, based on the background of this prosecutor, this officer may not even be indicted. Because we all know, and you have an expert here at the table, but a prosecutor can have a ham sandwich indicted. But if they don't want that indictment, they can also present a case that's weak, and you will get a return of a no indictment from a jury, grand jury.
I think the one thing that you want to do is you want to have the same standard of justice for everybody. You want local kids in the community. If Mr. Brown was accused of a homicide instead of this officer, you want him to be afforded the same protections that this officer is going to be afforded. But in order to do that, we also have to take a step back and make sure that the officer is guaranteed those protections. And that's why at the end you have to make sure that you get all of the information. And in my mind, if there's video or compelling testimony, for me, really, I'd like to see video. If there's video showing Mr. Brown in the police officer's car trying to struggle with that officer, that changes things for me. Because that tells me this officer didn't come out with intentions to harm Mr. Brown.
But does that justify 4, 5, and 6 bullets?
It depends on when those shots were fired. Now, if Mr. Brown is retreating before anything else happens, then there's no need to necessarily shoot him at that point. Now you have the ability to call for backup, but I do also understand that there are circumstances where sometimes police have to use deadly force.
We may never get that video you're looking for. No dash cam on the police car in question. As I mentioned, we're going to focus the entirety of the program tonight on the situation in Ferguson and the latest on the investigations. We want to ask you at home to get involved. Head to Facebook and Twitter, sound off on today's question. What should be done to calm the situation in Ferguson? And after a quick break, a closer look there. Local police were pushed off of security, and now the National Guard is being called in and trying to calm tensions across the city. Is the National Guard the answer? And are police in Ferguson overstepping their boundaries? What should they have done differently? And as part of the problem, the over-militarization of the police department, both there and around the country. That's next.